Today we are scheduled to talk about schools again. I know we talked a little bit about schools last time, but I really wanted to take some time to carve out to talk about alternative schools, charter, public schools, home schools. Um, where are all these other students? And I think it was not planned this way, just FYI. I did not start the COVID, but we have many students that are moving away from public school right now because of how school is being impacted by COVID-19. So I think we're going to find that we may need to start venturing into these areas if we have not already. Um, so I welcome all suggestions, and if anybody has already been working in those schools, um, just a little info, just to get a pull of where everybody's at. Does everybody know like what an alternative school is? You can drop in the chat if you want. I don't think I told you that. That's that word bubble, if you want. Or I see some head shakings. That works for me too. Okay. So an alternative school, is anybody working in the alternative schools right now?
So, hi everyone. I'm Troy Hall. I'm with Able, South Carolina.
Pretty soon, Able, South Carolina, we're gonna have like everybody on the call. I'm very excited.
Yes, I'm so excited. My schedule finally allowed me to jump in. So, hi to everyone. So I'll just share really quickly. We have been lucky enough to pilot some video style instruction with our South Carolina Virtual Charter School, which is an entirely online school. And we've also been working with the Department of Juvenile Justice. We've been working with them, video conferencing lessons with them, and they work on a slightly different schedule. They're sort of all year round. But those are the two ways that we've been able to sort of touch those non-traditional school venues. I will say, maybe there's an easier way to do it, and I'm all ears if anybody's got suggestions. This was kind of a longer process than I had hoped. It involved piloting an effort with a very small group of students. It involved going through a few points of contact until we really found someone who was equally invested in letting us come on board as a SIL. And then we were lucky enough to be able to wrap our existing funding stream into that. But yeah, I think after doing that, and it just so happened that a lot of our piloting of these video conferences happened as COVID was kind of ramping up. And so now that we're entering into this new school year, we can move beyond our smaller phase and start affecting more schools and turning that partnership into reaching out to middle schools. And we've been lucky enough that the virtual school is actually helping us reach out to different virtual schools in the state. So it's kind of been just an effort of following that spider web in a very grassroots manner. And we've got some really amazing staff members who are being the face of that and pushing that with a one-on-one connection. But yeah, that's kind of been our experience in a nutshell, and I'm open to give more details if anyone's interested.
Does anybody, really quick, I wanted to back up just really quick. So the alternative schools that I was specifically referring to, which I'm interested, I have some questions for you. Troy, this is probably, I think it's your first time being on. You'll realize that once you speak, I end up having a lot of questions. I think Paige is laughing the hardest, and Michael, because I often, I've got a million follow-up questions for you. But the alternative school, a lot of times with public schools, we see that due to behavior or due to sometimes current charges or criminal activity that a student may have been in, they are deemed not to be successful at the public school, or they are not able to attend due to an extended amount of suspensions and things like that. And so they put them at an alternative school, which is usually for that region or that district. All of the students that are in that same boat all go to that one school then. And they're supposed to, in a lot of places, they're supposed to be offering them more than just education of like academics. They're supposed to be offering a lot of social and emotional support. They're supposed to be doing counseling, maybe anger management, some of those pieces within that. That is what is supposed to happen. In my experience, it's interesting techniques that they use to do that. And then usually if they do not work out in that setting, then some school districts have an online version of that where they are then at home at all times. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit for anybody that didn't know. I saw there was some people that didn't know about that. Before I jump into anything further, did anybody have a question? I saw some people unmute for Troy. Here, somebody. All right. Well, so can you just go back over with me? I saw that Paige also dropped in the chat that you all do some stuff with the Schools for the Deaf and Schools for the Blind as well. Can you tell me, you mentioned something about the Juvenile Justice Center. Is that an alternative school, or is that can you explain what that looks like?
So I'll be upfront. I can't explain all the details of it because it's sort of a conglomeration. And Paige, if you know more off the top of your head, jump in. But so it's the Department of Juvenile Justice, so DJJ, and essentially youth that are incarcerated, they still go to school. So there are campuses set up all across the state, and they're residential facilities, so students live there, they sleep there, and then a lot of times they'll learn vocational skills there, usually a very small set of vocational skills, and then they go to school on campus, but the youth who go there are technically incarcerated. So we're lucky that it's a really, I mean, I don't work there, so I can't tell you all the details, but from what we've seen, there's a lot of really great people who work there, and they're really invested in helping those youth grow, and most of the time, their main priority is to transition them back into public schools or make sure they transition smoothly back into the working world or society or whatever happens whenever they're released. And then there are some incidences where if things don't work out on that DJJ campus, then they'll move to alternative settings, whatever those might be, which are usually a little harsher settings. But yeah, does that answer your question?
That does. That's kind of like, so the ones that I was referring to were more the schools that they are not actually in an incarcerated setting. It is not like they go home at the end of the day. There's busing there. It's a school. They may just have gone through the justice system in some way and have parole or probation, or have just had enough in the past to where they're going, yeah, you're not going to be successful here. And so they move them there. So that's almost, it sounds like the next level, and it may just look different in different states too. That's also. Okay. Thank you for explaining that though.
Yeah.
Does anybody, so you guys are in a lot of places. So what are what is the age group for the different, you said charter schools, schools for the deaf, schools for the blind, behavior specific schools. Can you talk about what are the behavioral specific schools are?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on which school district or county we're in. So like up here in Greenville, where there's a middle school and high school that's combined. And I think it's that step down alternative placement that you're thinking of, where behavior and a lot of suspensions, a lot in a row, a little bit more aggressive behavior, things like that. That's kind of this for this particular county, that's where all those students go. And it's that step before incarceration. And so we do a lot of work in there. And this particular school is middle and high school combined, which is an interesting age group. But I know in different counties, there are some that are specific for high schoolers or specific for middle schoolers. Just kind of depends on the age range and which school. And then our state only has one school for the deaf and blind combined. And that's middle school and high school. And that is, they also have an elementary age, but we have not worked with that age group. And that is also a residential school, or there's an option for that. So there's busing that goes all the way across the state. And then there's busing that will take students in, they stay on campus for that week, and then they go home for the weekend and then come back. And then there are students that stay the entire school year. So that's kind of a whole different age group as well, but mostly middle and high schools where we're accepted and invited in.
Okay. So I have so many questions. So Troy, you talked about points of contact and piloting. What all are y'all teaching when you're going into all these different settings? Is it the same thing that you teach in every other school setting? Is it different? Can you talk about how you got into that, like how you got into those schools? I'm sure that's like the number one question people have.
Yes. Well, how I got in is I think like everything, it's a little bit of luck, but it's kind of just trying over and over. We attempted to work with DJJ earlier, and I don't think there was a super strong partnership there. So and that was a little bit before my time, so Paige, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was sort of a tentative effort.
Yeah, and then we have a state interagency team that meets from all the different agencies that support youth and transition. And so there was a fresh new face from Department of Juvenile Justice that was invited to that meeting. And so I totally took advantage of making her feel welcome and throwing her a bunch of my cards and saying, we'd love to serve your students. They're the same as all the other students that we're talking about and trying to transition successfully. And I think me jumping on her at the first meeting and trying to make her feel really welcome played in our favor in building a new connection, because the previous connection we had, the person wasn't interested in interagency collaboration. And so it was just like Troy said, that little bit of luck with being able to recognize a fresh face and someone that was a little bit excited.
Yeah, and once Paige was able to make that connection and foster it, and we sort of tagged on some more people, and we have a really awesome youth transition specialist who was really passionate about working with that population, and then kind of saw the opportunity. And there were, I mean, like anything, but there were a lot of meetings, a lot of calls, a lot of video conferences, and to be really transparent, it was a little frustrating at times because it seemed like there were a lot of calls and we were kind of treading the same ground and we weren't really getting to the meat of actually providing services. But I think just pushing through and really being straightforward on action items and trying to hold people to a timeline. We were able to start with a small group and pilot, and so we do pre-employment transition services. So a lot of self-advocacy skills, a lot of work readiness skills, and the same curriculum that we use in the schools. That's what we use within the DJJ setting. And so we did have to adjust it because it was virtual. But of course now everybody is doing that. So we've all kind of learned to adjust that. Yeah, and so we worked with 2 small groups that really turned into one small group, and we went through a 6-week program. and we kind of figured out what worked and what didn't work. And then that same point of contact that Paige made, along with that youth transition specialist, they talked a lot and they created a bond, and we looped in a bunch of other people who were also interested in doing it, even if they didn't fully understand it. And now we are expanding it to more and more students, and we hope that grows more and more.
Awesome. All right. So is anybody else in any types of schools? They kind of listed all the types of schools. So the charter schools, private schools, excuse me, any of those, or if y'all tried and haven't been successful. I saw Angie, I'm interested in learning more about what you put in the chat. So in case you couldn't see it, shockingly, in the 4 counties in rural Northwest Ohio that I serve, there's only one school, and it is for all ages. I've seen as young as 5 to 6-year-olds being bused with high school age students. Also, the travel to and from the school for many youth is often an hour or more.
Yeah, that is what it's called, Independence Education Center, but that is the school where once the kids have become so disruptive in their classes that they just can't be kept in the classroom anymore, the next step is for them to go to Independence Education. And there is only one school. It's in Defiance County, but it serves all 4 counties. So depending on where the youth lives, they do provide busing, which is a bonus. The parents don't have to worry oftentimes about getting them there, but it is upwards of an hour for some of those students to get to the school and then get home. So I had just met with the principal of that school prior to COVID and was going to actually be doing a presentation during their teacher orientation this summer. And then that all kind of fell through, and I've reached out to the principal, but I think we're also still up in the air about what's going to happen. It's only 3 weeks away, but you just never know. So we do have multiple other schools I know there's one here in Williams County, which is where I'm located, and then there's one in Fulton County that are schools specifically for autism and other developmental disabilities that are much more, they're tailored to the needs of the students instead of the student needing to fit in with the classroom. And those seem pretty good. I've reached out, I've worked very closely with the one in Fulton County because the agency had already been linked with them prior to my being hired. So, and my son went there for hyperbaric oxygen treatment, which is a whole nother story. So I knew a lot of the teachers because we've been involved with them for 13 years. So the Bryan Center, I am also very familiar with the director, owner, principal, I don't know, but I have not been able to connect with her because of timing with COVID and everything. So that is on my list of things to get done, hopefully before school starts as well.
You said the Bryan Center, is that like the TBI?
No, it is autism. It's specific.
Okay.
It's Sandy Key is what it's called, but it's spelled like K. I don't know. I'm not sure what where that name came from, but it started as just a school for autism, but it has since expanded to serving other youth with disabilities, developmental disabilities.
So when you all are going into these different setting schools, now I know that if it's an alternative school, it's usually a branch of the public school, so they are still required to provide the IEPs, the 504s, and those types of things. But if it's usually when you get into those specific disability schools, they're sometimes private, sometimes charter. Their accommodations can sometimes look a little different, and the laws that they fall under are a little different as well. What have y'all come across with that? How have you been able to carry some of those messages over? Because I know if you're talking about IEPs at all in a public setting and you're at a school that doesn't offer IEPs, you have to change what that looks like, but still teaching them accommodations. How have y'all been able to do that? Or have you run into that at all?
I personally haven't. I can tell you that the 2 schools that I just mentioned, I think both still work very closely with the school district the child is coming from And I think they still honor the IEP and are involved in the IEP process. I can't say that for sure, don't quote me, but I believe that they do still work with the school districts on the IEP process. So I'm not sure how it is in other charter schools.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I wasn't sure. I know that I've seen other people run into those problems as well.
I imagine it would be in the bigger, like we're so small that everybody knows everybody. And so typically everybody gets along well and they work together instead of that competitive nature that you can sometimes run into as well.
Yeah. And I saw that Amy, you dropped in the chat before person Road to Independence programs was shut down due to COVID-19. Oh, go ahead. Did somebody have a comment? Okay. I was just gonna say, so she was talking about in there that they had one student who attended an alternative school before in Virginia Beach, and then this morning you got an INR call from a student who is homeschooled, interested in participating in your online youth independent living class. First of all, I love that a student was homeschooled and was like, yeah, I'd like to participate in this. That's an awesome youth.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that person elaborated that while they're homeschooled, they're receiving services through DARS. So my guess is that they found out about the SIL that I work at via DARS, Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services.
That's interesting. Well, very cool. I like this youth.
So Amy,
I don't know them, but I like them. Go ahead.
I don't know, Amy. So in your area is like Division of Rehabilitation combined with Area Aging and Agency kind of stuff, like it's like a combined program, or?
DARS in Virginia is shorthand for Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So yes, both populations are worked with. That came out weird, the phrasing, but
I think I get it. Yeah. Just here, ours is like separate, and if somebody calls and they're under a certain age, it's like, no, you have to go to DOORS. So it's like very separate. Just wasn't sure. I'm in Illinois. Everything's weird here and expensive.
Interesting. I thought Illinois would be less expensive than Virginia, especially since I live in a state where, because of the close proximity to DC, it's one of the highest areas of cost of living in the country. Makes teaching, budgeting, and looking for housing very interesting. And I mean that in a kind of sarcastic tone.
So, Amy, we had a quick question. How are you planning to kind of deliver those traditional classroom services to kind of one single youth through homeschooling? Do you have a framework set up, or?
No. And the reason is the Road to Independence program, it's like, it doesn't especially dive like extremely deep into, it's not specifically tailored for the schools. Like, it's flexible, and like I mentioned in the chat, we've really only been to one school, like one high school, and that was in Virginia Beach, but almost all of the classes otherwise had been offered specifically at the Independence Center. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I like Paige's comment of your brain never stops, Paige. That person may be able to link you to a homeschool group. Because those though I feel like are like hidden within the world of, they're really hard. If you can get that homeschool contact person though, it like opens you up to a whole network of people. That could be like a gold mine.
They are all on
That
Facebook.
makes sense.
They all have their
Yeah.
own private Facebook group.
That's really true, Shannon. And I feel like you could also get like, it's not just specific for pre-ets with high school or middle school, but elementary. I feel like there's a whole wave of parents that would love for someone to come in and orchestrate like a group activity and understanding and diversity and inclusion and social emotional learning. I feel like if they're just waiting there, you just have to find that little pocket of where they are.
Mhm.
Sorry for anybody that may not be a part of these, but our towns have ladies of, and so it's like whatever town you're in, all the ladies of are all in this Facebook group. So if you're ladies of Raleigh, ladies of Charlotte, and so, but I say that because there's a lot of moms within those groups. And like, especially right now, they've started recruiting teachers away from the school system and starting co-ops. They're not calling it homeschooling. They're calling it like co-op schools. And so if you can get on a ladies of page, that's a big thing down here. I don't know.
Idea. That's not a bad idea. I'll have to see if there are similar, I'm going to have to look it up, see if there are similar pods in Southside Hampton Roads, Virginia.
And I don't want anybody to feel excluded. They do have men's of groups as well. But from what I understand, those groups are like, hey, I'm looking for dirt. Does anybody have any? So it just isn't as applicable. But there may be other groups. I just don't know of them. That was just an idea.
Now, be fair, Sierra, they're also looking for Easter eggs in video games.
I see. These are things I don't know, but I don't know. I haven't ever felt the desire to join said groups. So I just know they're out there. I don't know your name, but the SKO something. I mentioned that they're an alternative school for youth of all ages. They bus them from many counties. I basically do driver's ed for the high school. My students come and go through the year, sometimes only once or twice, depending on if they stay at the school or not. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like? Because that, I don't know, anybody that's in those alternative schools, have y'all come across that where students are in or out of your programs?
Yeah. With my program, I just basically right now I'm doing driver's ed. And if the student gets in trouble with the school or with the authorities of any kind, then they're gone. So sometimes I'll have a student once or twice in class and then they're gone, and then somebody will come in because they got in trouble somewhere, so they bring them to the school and then they come in the middle of my class. So yeah, they come and they go. It's kind of interesting sometimes because the teachers have to come in sometimes too and discipline them and so forth. So yeah, an alternative school is a little bit different than a regular school. You're muted.
I'm muted. Yep. I realized it's like it's not coming up. Sorry, can you tell me your name real quick? I didn't catch
Sarah.
it. Sarah, okay. And then, so how do you go around that, I guess? How do you work with those students and make those connections? Because I know that it just takes so long to sometimes build those relationships. And
I don't know. We've been in the school for quite a while. So there was like 3 people before me that got in there. So I'm not real sure. It's the only school around here. They bus them from 50 miles away, to bring them here. So we've been doing this for quite a while.
that's good to hear.
And the school is basically to help the kids, the older kids learn job skills. So when I go, they're working on putting things together or how you put hamburgers together if you work in a fast food place and stuff like that. But we don't do that. That's not our part of it. So
Okay. Well, nice. I like that you're going into those places and kind of showing like educating past just like how to put a burger together.
Yeah. Well, you have to, you have to deal with different behaviors and stuff also. So, you're doing other things besides just the driver's ed.
Yeah. And do you all find that a lot of it is dealing, like working around the behaviors or understanding mental health more? Go ahead, Shannon.
I think that's part of it. When I worked, we have like a regional school, comes from a bunch of counties, bust in, like you guys were talking about. Especially they kind of separated out into like kind of a different curriculum for the autistic population that goes there. And so that was kind of interesting, and I had to really be very black and white and like step back from it and really talk about it in terms of, I see your behavior as aggressive right now. No, I'm not. Okay. But other people see, so that's always difficult but I tried to really express it even with some of the kids with behavioral issues. I said, what you're doing right now, a lot of employers would consider rude. Well, that's just how I am. So kind of trying to teach that, like, it's a choice. You can choose how you respond to situations. So some of that might just be my psychology background training stuff, but I feel like that does come into it a lot. And I try to teach it from a perspective of like what an employer would consider that behavior, or a coworker, how they would respond to that, and try to make it kind of a learning moment for the rest of, for everybody in the classroom, as opposed to teacher do something, kind of thing. Because it also kind of refocuses the attention if they're trying to get out of doing something. It's like, okay, why? Like, let's use this. So, but we always have the actual teachers, like when we were going to the class, all the teachers and all the aides would always stay in the classroom with us. So I don't know if anybody else has had the teacher that wants to go to the lounge or something, but we pretty much set that up right at the beginning, like the teachers stay in the room. I think a lot of schools have that anyway, like they don't want the teachers to leave, but we've set it up so the teachers are part of it and keeping the class on track and stuff.
Do any of y'all do like, I don't know what you would call them, but like teacher meetings or agreements and like set up their priorities and parameters of what the class will look like before you enter? Have like a teacher meeting about that beforehand, or do you not get a chance to?
Say for us, it's kind of, it varies from school and district. So like we've got a district we've worked with for a really long time, and we signed an MOU with them. And it kind of lays out like really basic what we're going to cover, the amount of times we're going to come into the school, and then what the school's going to provide for us. So they're going to, provide us a teacher in the classroom, a space to meet with the students, all of that. But then there's some districts that say, come on in. And then we get left in a classroom, and then there's a fire drill, and I'm walking outside with a bunch of kids and I look like one. And and I'm like, I don't know where we're going, and I don't know how many kids I'm supposed to have. But so it's really kind of like, it really depends on the school and the district.
Yeah. That's actually happened. I have a twin sister that actually happened to her. Someone told her when she was in high school, you need to have a hall pass. Where's your hall pass? And it was like, actually, I work here.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead.
This is Heather with Options, so I apologize. Actually, I was on the phone with one of my teachers for the first part of this meeting. So to answer your question, yeah, we do a lot of talking about the different students that are going to be in the program this year, what the needs are, and then I kind of come up with, a tentative timeline and almost syllabus that they can either keep for themselves as teachers, or they can share it with the students or their parents. I try and stick to that for the most part. This year is going to be really difficult because half of my, at least in this one school, half of my fast track students that I'm going to have opted to do remote learning, and the other half have opted to do in-person learning. So trying to figure out how what's going to be the best way of reaching all of them. And the school is still kind of on the fence if they're going to allow outside agencies to come in at all. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And I saw a lot of head shaking when you were saying that. So I guess a lot of you are on that same boat of you don't even know if the schools are going to let you in this year. And who knows, they may let you in like week 2 and then like week 3 there's an outbreak and they go, yeah, no more of that. So yeah. And I liked some of the suggestions that were in the chat. Rosie had said motivational interviewing skills are really useful in the situations like Shannon was talking about a little bit ago with like not really wanting to engage in the conversation or maybe being rude or disrespectful in some of their responses back to you. There was one more that I saw too. Oh, Joe, you said engage before you redirect. You have to establish an attachment in order for them to begin to engage. Those are really good. And then evidently Michael has key things that he says to keep teachers in the class, but appreciating their support. I used to have them do things for me. I would have the teachers work. Just if I needed them in the class. Sometimes I didn't care if they left, but I'd be like, well, you know, this could be a really great lesson for you to piggyback off of later. So I'm just providing you some material here if you want to stay here. And then, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, when we do our financial literacy lessons, we've had teachers come bring in teachers from other classrooms to sit in the back for our lessons. And they're like taking notes. How do you raise your credit score? What do you do again? It's kind of funny.
Oh, I would so make a student like be the leader of that. Like I would break them into small groups, be like, this student is going to be your teacher now. Please teach this teacher how to do that. Okay. So it looks like some of you also know that you're not going to be able to go in schools at all. But it sounds like some of you have already been piloting and using some of these virtual platforms anyways to be able to get in. I guess who else is in alternative schools or any other kinds of schools? We haven't really talked a lot about charter and private schools. Or any of you in those? Somebody did mention further up about, oh, Kendra, you said HomePods. You've been hearing of and have been reaching out to the local bulletin group on Facebook. So yeah, who would have thought Facebook would be like, are you in this group on Facebook? And hybrid schedules. So yeah, I think a lot of schools are doing those hybrid schedules. And how are y'all navigating that? Any ideas of what you're going to do for that?
This is Rosemary from Denver Atlantis community. I was doing an online, we started it in person back in January, and then we had to switch to online because we went into quarantine. And I know that the same district is planning to do all online until October and then reassess and decide what will happen after October. I'm assuming it will be more online learning. The thing that we've done in the past is I think for me, the thing that I'm having a hard time imagining is like building the rapport and the relationship with the students when you're starting out online with a new group of like a whole new cohort. Whereas when I started in January, we had 3 months to kind of build that relationship. And then we transitioned to online and we were all shifting. And so it was something new for all of us to go through. But then starting out online and trying to build that same relationship when there is resistance, when a lot of students want to be back in the classrooms to be able to get all of the services and be with their peers. I haven't quite figured out what that will look like. But I do know that the the schools that I've been working with, or the districts I've been working with, are really eager to have us continue to do the workshops and the classes that we were teaching. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make that transition. And when we were doing it in person, a lot of times the teachers were not present. And that was because we were teaching accessible sex ed, and that was a requirement that I made sure that the teachers were not in the room, and that we were creating a safe space within our own group. And it's a two-part. So like, I wanted it to be a safe space for the students, but at the same time, I also wanted them to have that connection to our SIL, so that when they do graduate, they know that there are other people who are a resource outside of their teacher or their special ed director or whoever their caseworker was, so that they at least had another familiar face that they trusted in the community. And so doing that and asking the teacher not to be in the room was a big portion, so that the teacher could have time to do prep or do other things that they needed to do. And the students could then build relationships with us and say, oh, okay, after I graduate, I can go to Atlantis and hang out with Rosemary, and she can help me with getting a job or applying for benefits, etc. So a lot of different pieces that I heard in some of the earlier conversations. I'm sorry I'm late, but those are some of the things that we've done in the past and will continue to modify for moving forward.
Michael, did you want to ask a question? I saw your hand go up.
I was just going to add, so if anyone has any questions, I was going to talk, we just had a big event and some of the strategies we used to make all the online stuff accessible for that event. So if anyone has any questions for Rosemary first, please jump in.
Rosie, just to understand, so you said you were teaching sex ed, was that in like just the public school, or that was the alternative school you were teaching that?
So I did it with the Denver Public Schools 18 to 21 transition program to start, and then I did it with a charter school within that same district, but it was more for students who traditional public school was not a good setting for them. A lot of them had non-apparent disabilities and maybe were in the process of getting an IEP but didn't have one. A lot of them had certain behaviors or were in juvenile detention centers and now are returning back to school. So I've done a little bit of both.
What do you mean by accessible sex ed?
So the curriculum that we use is called Elevatus, and it's specifically written for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Not just students, but the target population is for intellectual developmental disabilities. So it's written in plain language. There's a lot of images that go with the text, and the content covers from like birth until death, and so it covers like all like puberty. It covers healthy relationships. It covers different communication styles. And
you have the healthy relationships curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have that. Is similar to that,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in the language and stuff. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And I think, Michael, could you share a little bit about what you're doing to make the accessible stuff of how you've been able to transition what you have that's been online?
Yeah. So we just had our South Carolina Youth Leadership Forum, and it went really, really well. We had really high attendance. All of our delegates were able to participate in the lessons that we were doing in all different kinds of ways. And we had a ton of different disabilities. So some of the things that we worked on is trying to limit the different types of technology that we were using. So there's really, really cool programs out there like Nearpod and PowerPoint and all these things. We tried to focus it in to give consistency. So when we were teaching all of the youth that we were working with, the delegates, how to engage with what we were doing, we were just doing the same thing over and over again. So it made it easier for them to learn how to access that technology. We also made sure that things were available in multiple formats. So we'd like share the PowerPoint, but we also put it in a Google Drive so they could download it. We had a few that needed to do that and adjust things on their own end, so they had access to those ahead of time. We had the captioning was really important, but also being able to encourage everyone to talk using their microphones and videos and walking them through those processes, as well as being able to use the chat. They had options to email us outside. So just trying to make sure we are creating as accessible as possible. And then the breakout rooms actually worked really, really well. So we did have to have a staff member in each one of those to help provide support, but being able to break into smaller groups was something that worked. And you might be able to use some of the teachers in the classrooms and those supports, or if you've got some really good leaders in the classroom. Sometimes my classrooms, I got some youth that I could probably count on to run a breakout if I gave them materials and make sure that they worked on. It just depends on the classrooms that you're in. And then also we went through everything and made doubly sure that all of the language that we were using was accessible, and paused. So if someone was presenting something and they used words that were too big or too complicated, we made sure we took extra time to have all of the delegates be able to ask questions or defining words. And by the end of the week that we were doing it, the delegates were self-defining words. So if they used like a large word and it needed to be defined for people, they'd learned, they're like, okay, and then this word means this, before even anyone had to ask what did it mean or anything like that. We also made sure we worked in breaks. Everyone's getting Zoom fatigue. And so we tried to work in times for people to take those breaks in between lessons. So if you're doing like a longer day of things, if you're doing multiple hours in a row with the same group, making sure you give them time, that like 15 minutes to go, and being very clear about the time that we're coming back. And we were a little flexible on that. Every now and then we got to the end a little early, but usually the discussions were good enough that we actually went a little over. And so trying to make sure they still get at least 10 minutes to run to the bathroom and come back. Yeah, and we were able to use some things like Kahoot in the afternoon thing. So as long as they have some experience with it and you can support them in learning how to do it, just trying to keep the materials you're using consistent makes that information a lot more accessible for them, rather than working in multiple different technology formats that they have to learn all at once. Was there anything else that you were thinking, Max, that I missed?
Since it was YLF and it was over an extended period of time, Ryan and Michael met to make sure that that youth had like a training day on just what Zoom looked like and how to use all the different features without having to then jump into a session. It was purely just like, here's how this works, let's try it out, let's make sure your internet works and all of that, and then if you have questions, we can follow up and make sure that we're making things work for you. So, and then that also allowed us that really great opportunity of like, hey, I noticed you're in the kitchen and your parents are really loud, like let's find a room that's a little bit quieter. So it kind of, we got to survey them and set them up for success for the week without having to like dive right into content. So I envision as we move into our content sessions with youth and schools in the fall, doing something very similar, where we're purely just getting used to the platform first before we jump into content. And youth seem to really like and connect with each other. We were anxious that we were going to lose a lot of that spirit and community from YLF, but I mean, we were on Zoom until 9 o'clock every night, hearing youth sing and bands play for us, and getting tours of everyone's bedroom, and so they jumped and were attracted to it much faster than our staff, for sure. So I'm sure that as they continue to do this in schools, we're gonna get beat out by our youth pretty soon with being tech savvy.
I saw a couple questions in the chat. We didn't use Kahoot directly. We used a program at night for some of the games that's similar to Kahoot. They were Jackbox games. So basically you just put in the code just like Kahoot and you can play some games. It was pretty accessible. The downside to that is that it worked better with youth who had multiple pieces of technology. So if it's hard to be on a Zoom call and play that game if all you have is a phone or all you have is a tablet, because you can't see your friends, you can't see your other classmates in the room. So it definitely works better if they had like a smartphone and their tablet, or a smartphone and their computer, or some combination of those. And then we actually did it over 6 days. Usually we do 4 days, 3 nights, but we did it over 6 days this year, with limited time. So we started at 10 a.m. and we ended all the major content for the day at 3, and then we took a long break and got back together around 6 to do the afternoon activities, because we thought it was still important to build in some of that organic connection time that you get when you're at the event. And that was something else that we did at the beginning of each session. Is just like in a classroom, if you went in, you don't immediately start the lesson. We built in time for people to chat and hang out and have conversations that weren't necessarily on topic at all or related to what we were doing, just to build those friendships. And we encouraged them to continue those connections outside of each of the lessons that we were doing. We put together a Google Doc where they could list out all of their gamer tags and usernames. And I don't know how they keep up with the amount of social media accounts they all have. But they were able to give all that information to stay connected with each other. And I think as well, for looking at virtual school things, we might have students who aren't in the same classes as each other all the time. It just happens to be during the same class period. And so encouraging them to build those connections and have those supports with similar minded people outside of the room, I think is important as well.
And Michael, can you clarify, you said that there was a document that the youth put in all of their like social media or ways to stay in touch, or was that through the chat?
So we tried to do the chat at first, and then every lesson became everyone putting everything in the chat. So we made just a Google Word doc for them to do that in. And then a few days later, Troy made a really great Google form, which I think might be even easier, where you can have it autofill like an Excel sheet. Because the Google Doc was difficult to read for me, for sure, but that might put it in a more accessible form for people to be able to get to.
Awesome, thank you.
So, and does anybody else, I know Bianca had asked the YLF, anybody else that ran YLF and want to just kind of give a quick rundown of what the daily time frame and what that looked like for you this summer?
So this is Rosemary. I didn't do a formal YLF, like there was no Colorado YLF, but through Atlantis, we did an Empower Youth Summit. And so it was once a week on Wednesday afternoons for 10 sessions. So I just really spread it out because I knew that it was going to be hard for me in my capacity to do it for a week straight, and Zoom fatigue and all the other things. So I still took the same structure and format of, you know, each day is a different topic. We had some guest speakers who came in. We had built-in 5-minute dance breaks. So we had a collaborative playlist that they added their songs that they wanted to listen to. And so I would play that, and we would have a dance break, and some people would opt in and other people would take a break from their screens and then come back at an agreed time. We had a youth spotlight at the end of each session. So the youth would share out, and it was kind of like an open mic, whatever was like on their mind or something that they learned from that day's conversation. And we also we had an ADA celebration type thing because it fell on ADA week. So really trying to be creative and piecing those things together. We couldn't do a typical legislative visit or Capitol Day type thing, obviously, but I had someone from the school board, someone from city council, a senator, and someone from the regional transit board, and they all were on a panel talking about how they got to the power that they have right now and advice that they would share with their 18-year-old self. So it was definitely more conversational, and I think a great experience for the youth to be able to know how accessible our elected officials can be, And it doesn't have to look like everyone that works in the Capitol. It could be your school board, it could be your city council, it could be different levels of ways that you get involved. And tomorrow is our last session, so we'll do a wrap up, and we had pre and post surveys that I had them complete. But yeah, we definitely spread it out, and I think overall, like, we had 18 youth who were registered, which was really exciting, and they came from all across the state, and we had rural students who wanted to participate and wouldn't have been able to if it wasn't online. So that was really great too.
Awesome. And just to comment on North Carolina, we did something very similar to what Rosie explained for our Youth Leadership Forum. It was started at the beginning of July, ran 4 days a week with 2-hour sessions for different things. We had some sessions that were like your material information for those 2 hours, some that were small group goal setting and projects that we had, and then Friday nights were just the hangouts, and some we did crib camp, as Paige talked about, and then we had like a whole debrief and how does it make you feel, you know, all the mushy gushy discussion stuff. And so we talked about that as well. Thank you all for sharing. I like that we kind of did a little while after brief there. But I'm going to drop in. So there's the evaluation. If you just take a moment, fill that out. Again, I think it says like, how did the speakers do? You all are the speakers. So we do not make it. We are scheduling a meeting. Our next already scheduled meeting is the first Tuesday of September. That is going to be on motivating factors, and I'm really interested to talk about that because I want to talk about exactly what you were talking about, Rosie, of how are we going to motivate these individuals? How are we going to build that connection with somebody when we already know virtually it's hard to build a connection? And so I'm hoping that maybe we can come together for some of those conversations and idea sharing. Just as a reminder, I am working on getting the date finalized, so look out for the end of this month. We are hoping to do a presentation. We don't have a name for it yet. Check me back on the 12th and I'll get a name, but on Black Lives Matter and inclusion and diversity and how to hold those conversations. And that's going to be a youth talk, so that will be a presentation style. And then the second part of September, we're going to hold an extra Youth Coordinators Connect to be able to openly talk about that subject here after we've kind of learned a little bit from a prisoner and somebody that's all involved. Yes, April is going virtual. So there was a question in the chat. April conference is the 12th through the 15th this year. So you'll notice usually run over a weekend. We are running over a week, just 1 week. And there will be a youth track session. Instead of doing a youth conference, we thought 8 to 9 hours on Zoom would be a little much. So they're going to run it over the whole week. But we will, October, 12th through 15th of October. And so we're hoping to get the registration up and out and open the middle of August. So I will be sending all of those things out. So sorry if I bombard you for the rest of the month with information, but hopefully it's useful information. So I will be in contact soon. Thank you all for joining us. I always like hearing what you're doing, and you all are doing so much great stuff. We will chat for sure the first Tuesday of September, and hopefully you'll be able to join the training towards the end of the month. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye.